Today, we're honored to have with us Monica Indart, doctor of psychology. She is a doctor of psychology and is a licensed psychologist who provides an array of clinical and consulting services for crisis, disaster, and trauma-related issues. She helped establish and serve as director of Doctors Without Borders, psychosocial care unit, a specialized unit for providing support and consultation to humanitarian and aid workers. Dr. Indart has provided consultation, program development, and evaluation and professional training to the United Nations Secretariat, UNDP, and UNICEF in areas of crisis and trauma response, peer support, staff care, and emergency preparedness. Dr. Indart provides pro bono psychological evaluations and interventions for asylum seekers for several organizations, including Physicians for Human Rights and Help Right International's Human Rights Clinic, where she has been a volunteer since 2002. She provides clinical consultation, training, and development and evaluation services for refugees and migrants for the International Rescue Committee and other international NGOs. She has provided training and consultation services in countries and contexts such as Ukraine, Turkey, Chile, Greece, Uganda, Rwanda, the West Bank, and Thailand. She maintains a private practice specializing in the treatment of severe trauma, grief, and loss, including survivors of torture, suicide, and homicide. She's a part-time associate clinical professor at the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology at Rutgers University, where she earned her Psych in Clinical Psychology in 1994. Clinical and research interests include adaptations to severe trauma across the lifespan, traumatic grief, cultural narratives of trauma, traumatic experiences, gender issues in the refugee experience, and intergenerational trauma. All attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of this presentation. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to send them to me via the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Following the presentation, I will read the questions to Monica. And right now, it is my privilege to turn it over to Monica Indart. Where's yours, Monica?
Thank you. A big thank you to Micah and Caitlin and the Alumni Association for having me this morning. Thank you all for being here during times that the word unprecedented has become overused, and it's just become part of our everyday language. But we are living in times that are quite challenging. So today's presentation and discussion will be about the soul and science of resilience, keeping ourselves strong during the challenges of COVID-19. So I'll be talking about resilience to start with, a bit about workplace resilience. Many of us, our workplaces have changed as we work remotely from home, and then focusing most of the presentation on personal resilience and factors related to that. As Micah mentioned, we'll have questions at the end, and I will really look forward to those and want to leave time for those. So again, thank you very much for having me and for being here this morning. A bit of what we'll talk about is what is resilience? Why is it important? Are people just born resilient or not? And how do we build resilience in ourselves and a bit in our workplaces as well? So the concept of resilience is particularly useful and helpful now, and it's experienced a resurgence as people are trying to look for ways to stay resilient, become more resilient under increasingly stressful times during this pandemic. And resilience will be important to us individually, in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces, in our countries, as we move forward, because this will, as we are all aware, be a long road. And resilience is all about maintaining strength, focus, intentionality, purpose, and meaning for the long haul. So resilience is both a state, it's showing a resilient response in the face of adversity. It's often the sort of common sense term for it. It's the ability to bounce back. And it's also a trait. So yes, some people are simply born with a little bit more of the physical and psychological characteristics that are associated with resilience because of their temperament. And again, it's this quality of bouncing back. So I like to think of it as both a potential and a capacity that we have and a potential that we can continue to build on. One of the most eloquent researchers in resilience is Anne Maston, who coined the term ordinary magic. So Dr. Maston, a social scientist, has done tremendous research that has really helped us understand the roots of resilience in children and how children develop resilience. What are the characteristics, what are the features of themselves and their environments that build resilience? And that's where she came up with the term ordinary magic, which I always rely on. Resilience components, and these are the hardiness aspect, are what we think of as more of the genetically influenced components, the aspects of temperament, what we are born into this world with in terms of characteristics. So hardiness is one of those temperamental, genetically based kind of characteristics. And hardiness can be broken down in order to understand the larger concept. We realize that it means there's three different aspects to it. One is control, the capacity to control emotions and impulses, to be able to use them to our benefit, to the benefit of social systems or communities. Commitment, the ability to follow through with things. And challenge, again, the capacity to be able to maintain functioning and grace under pressure, so to speak. Other aspects of resilience include a concept we call transformational coping. And post-traumatic growth, which are two related characteristics, not necessarily part of resilience per se, but sort of second cousins. And these two concepts have to do with how we respond to adversity and traumatic events in our lives. The capacity that human beings have to be able to transform suffering into something worthwhile and meaningful, and to be able to grow from adversity, to grow from traumatic events. A key aspect of that I'll be talking about next is a concept called optimism, which we'll get into a bit more. So a takeaway is that resilience can be learned. It can be developed, expanded, deepened. So it's something that we can teach our children, teach ourselves, work to strive towards in our workplaces. To start with a sort of a basics of the resilient response. So three basic ingredients, elements, so to speak, of a resilient response. The first is to confront the stressful event. So as I say to many of my patients in psychotherapy practice, avoidance is not our friend most of the time. There's times where it can be helpful in the immediate aftermath of something traumatic, but in general, we want to avoid avoidance. It may help us feel better in the moment, but it often leads to more problems down the road. So a common way that people may avoid stressful, adverse events is to use substances more, for example, to drink more. And that's what we mean about it can make you feel better in the moment, but will cause more problems down the road. So it's important to define the stressful event, to acknowledge it, name it, own it. This is what I'm struggling with, and not to sort of sugarcoat that. The second is to orient yourselves toward a positive future outcome. What do I want to get from this adverse event? What do I want to get from this challenge? How do I want this to turn out? And that requires optimism and a sense of purpose, but to orient yourself to a positive future outcome that you can work toward. And then to actively engage in coping, including support from others. So taking small, manageable steps in solving what feels like an insurmountable challenge. And over and over again, social science and psychological research teaches us that social support is so, so important. Social support is one of the building blocks of positive health outcomes. Physical health, mental health, social support is always an ingredient of that. So being able to have people in our lives, family, friends, coworkers, that we trust, rely on, that can support us, and that we can also support them. Just a little bit about resilience at work, and there's many programs, many excellent programs that are all about building resilience at work, and I'll cite a manual at the end of these next couple of slides that gives you the reference. What we know from research about resilience building programs at work is that resilience is generally associated with greater job satisfaction, happiness at work, and commitment to the organization. So being really fully engaged with your workplace. Feeling more resilient in your workplace can help you feel better about yourself, so enhance self-esteem, give you a sense of control over your life and events, and primarily it gives a sense of deeper purpose and meaning as we connect to our coworkers and to the purpose of our work. So it results not just in increased productivity, but increased valuable and valued productivity. Valued certainly by the organization, but what I find as a psychologist most important is that it has very high personal value to individual workers and staff. These are components of a workplace resiliency program. Just one example. This is from the American Heart Association Center for Workplace Health Research and Evaluation, where they have this manual resilience in the workplace. So again, many of us are familiar with this. Overcoming interpersonal challenges, managing difficult emotions, being able to remain calm under stressful circumstances and in intense situations, intense conflicts sometimes with coworkers, improving our communication skills, including cross-cultural communication is so critical, feeling the capacity to take on new challenges, and then really focusing on workplace wellness. So a workforce that pays attention to physical health and mental health. Example, really emphasizing the importance of sleep and recognizing that in work schedules, and the importance of good preventive medical care. I'll say now that, many of us have the opportunity and the privilege to work at home, because resilience is in many ways, the topic of it can be a privilege to be able to examine that. There are many communities in the world and populations in the world that have to survive and don't have the luxury of being able to consider resilience. So many of us, as difficult as these times are, managing work and childcare, many of us are working from home, trying to school our kids, to try to remember that that's also a privilege that we have, and how do we want to use this time. When I say that, I don't in any way diminish how challenging that can be and how challenging these times are. So those of us who are able to work from home, I think, feel very mixed in some ways. We're very, very grateful for it. We find it very challenging, and some of us can even feel a little bit of guilt because we realize it is a privileged position. So all of that goes into understanding what keeps us resilient in many ways. Some additional factors I just want to conclude with in the resilience at work section is to create a resilience culture. And I mean resilience and not resilient. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But a resilience culture is a broader endeavor where we really engage in trying to build the kind of workplace environment that supports one another, builds capacity, encourages challenge. So what does it mean to be resilient in the face of adversity? You take that on as a workplace challenge. Look for ways to improve the work environment through allowing greater autonomy, rewarding good work, not just more work or fast work, but good work, providing access to services for physical and mental health, flexible work schedules. It's very clear now that being able to have the option to work from home and flexible work schedules actually increases productivity. Most recent study shows that people who are working from home, organizations that allow for that, have 13% greater productivity as one example. And then to give reasonable work expectations as well. I just want to highlight one thing that may sound a bit controversial, but Michael Pollan, an odd reference here, the food critic and food politician, if I can say, was recently talking about the fragility of the American food delivery systems, how we really are realizing in this pandemic how fragile our entire food distribution is. And so he was talking a bit about resilience, and he made an excellent point that I just wanted to emphasize a bit. Efficient systems are not necessarily resilient systems. Efficient systems, an example is our food distribution network. We've ended up with these giant distribution systems rather than smaller family farms or smaller communities, where we have as an example, four large meat distribution, meat packing systems in the country that manage all of the country's meat supply. And so we're seeing what happens when COVID-19 hits that. So it looked like a very efficient system years ago when we were industrializing this process. It maximizes output with a minimum of input. It's efficient in that way. So you get the most bang for the buck. But to recognize that these kind of highly efficient systems are by nature narrow and shallow. Resilient systems, on the other hand, are messy. So resilient systems are a bit messy. They seek to expand and build diversity and redundancy. By nature, they emphasize depth and breadth. And so to be thinking about that just as we return to our workplaces and rethink some ways of how we organize systems in our lives and work world as well. For the next part, I'm going to be focusing, the remainder of the time, I'm going to be focusing on personal resilience. And the information for this is taken from a wonderful book, 2012, I believe. I have the reference at the end, by two psychiatrists, Stephen Southwick from Yale School of Medicine and Dennis Charney from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And so Southwick and Charney wrote this wonderful book called Resilience, the Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges, which is based on excellent science, as the point is made, but is highly usable. So I recommend this book for a lot of my clients and organizations that I work with. So they came up with 10 factors. I'll ask their forgiveness and indulgence and that I've tweaked them a bit, but these are their essential 10 factors of fostering resilience. The first is to build optimism, to have this future orientation, hope, confidence that things will turn out well with effort. Not always, obviously, and we are certainly facing the limits of some of that now, but that we have some capacity to influence the future. It gives cognitive, mental, and emotional energy to fuel other factors like facing fear, and we'll talk about that. It's associated with, optimism is associated with a range of positive mental and physical health outcomes. It always comes up as one of the top factors associated with positive outcome. We found that Charney found in a study of a 37-year long longitudinal study of repatriated prisoners of war, that the disposition, the characteristic of optimism was the factor that was most related to positive outcomes after being held prisoner of war in camps across long periods of time. Optimism can be learned. So I'll reference Barbara Fredrickson's what's called the broaden and build model, which looks at examining the relationship between positive and negative emotions and how by focusing on positive emotions, we can lessen the impact of negative ones and we build a greater capacity to face challenges. So negative emotions, worry, anxiety, fear, disappointment, resentment as examples. They restrict our focus. They activate a part of our brain that we use to survive threats. So what's called the sympathetic nervous system, the emergency system of the brain, they activate that part of the brain that we use to when we're looking to survive threats to our physical or psychological safety. So by nature, they tend to restrict our focus. And what positive emotions do is they tend to broaden our focus, build out our focus, so we can look at more options. It's the expanded capacity for focus that's so important. Being able to look at a range of different options for solving problems and finding meaning and purpose in ordinary events. So some aspects of Fredrickson's broaden and build theory are how positive emotions broaden, build deeper capacity for what we call thought action habits. How we think about things influences our emotional state and our capacity to act on those positive thoughts and emotions. So things like joy, interest, contentment, compassion. If ever there was a time in history to build compassion individually, families, communities, workplace, societies, this is the time to build compassion. So compassion is a key ingredient to this. As I mentioned, positive emotions, they tend to undo the lingering effects of negative emotions. They're part of resiliency. They're part of physical and psychological well-being, and they help us develop greater resources, which is part of resilience again. So we can choose to be grumpy, as shown by this little guy here who finds himself in the snow and just looks none too happy about it. We don't really know what he's feeling, but we can, just his face right now looks like none too happy about it when we encounter a snowstorm. Or we can choose to be this little guy who's bounding through the snow, enjoying the beauty of it. And it's a little bit of a graphic depiction of the choices we make in terms of our emotional states and how we deal with things that we may not have wished for. Brene Brown, another social scientist who's got some wonderful TED Talks, talks about how hope is a function of struggle. It's not an emotion. It's a cognitive behavioral process. It's a thought action pattern, in other words, that we learn when we experience adversity. So we build our capacity for hope through facing adversity. The second aspect is facing our fears. And this is part of what I mentioned earlier in terms of the 3 steps of a resilient approach, in terms of avoidance. So we face our fears. And this wonderful quote by Nelson Mandela, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. So the ability to face our fears. Right now, in a time of high anxiety with the COVID pandemic, is really the time, if we're struggling with it, to learn the capacity, build and develop the capacity to turn around and face our fears and anxieties. It's a natural human instinct, and many times, to want to run away from fears. It takes something else to stop, turn around, and walk toward them, face them, and understand them. So that is the key, is understanding that which makes us fearful and which makes us anxious. Embrace a moral compass. Those of us who feel like we have a purpose in our lives, hopefully all of us understand the importance of having a moral compass, sort of like knowing what is your true north. So to be able to really consider what are your core beliefs, to know what those are and know that there's very few things that are going to shatter those core beliefs. The ability, the capacity to do the right thing gives substantive psychological benefits. Again, in the study of prisoner of war survivors, their capacity to hold on to their moral compass and do the right thing was positively associated with eventually good health and mental health outcomes. And altruism is something that has been strongly associated with resilience. To find and feed a faith that sustains you, whether that's a religion, a spiritual belief, whatever it is, but a larger, something bigger than ourselves, to be able to sustain us during difficult times. After the terrorist attacks of 9/11, we found that there were increases in religiosity, but primarily spirituality, the need to believe in something, to have this faith that sustained us, and that faith and the search for those beliefs was associated with, again, more positive coping after 9/11. We know from health psychology research that those with stronger religious and spiritual beliefs tend to have better health outcomes. And to understand the role of forgiveness and empathy is a factor I talk a lot about, not for today, but a factor that I'm very interested in. There's a notion of universal empathy that I find to be so important, again, right now during such challenging times, and that's also associated with resilience. Social connections are not optional. They are not optional. We need to build the ties that bind. So again, what I mentioned earlier in terms of the research on social connections and social relationships and how important that social support is to our health. In many ways, in many studies rather, in what's called meta-analytic studies, studies that look at aggregate large groups of studies, we have found that social support is widely considered to be one of the most critical protective factors in relation to the development of post-traumatic stress disorder, meaning that for those individuals who are exposed to something that is a potentially traumatic event, car accident, assault, terrorist attack, a natural disaster, we find that those individuals and communities with greater and deeper social support are protected and are less likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, all things being equal. And again, we over and over again, the association to positive health outcomes. The sixth factor is to find role models at any and every age. So to understand, we oftentimes think of role models as sources of inspiration when we're young, when we're kids. We want coaches and teachers and parents and religious figures to be role models for our children. But to understand that the need for role models and the importance of role models does not change as we age. In some ways, it becomes important in a different way. So just to interject a little bit here on some sort of soft neurology, as I call it, the role of mirror neurons, these neurons in your brain that pay attention to what you see and experience. So for example, if you see someone acting empathically, then you may be more likely to act empathically yourself. So imitation allowing for practice sort of in the abstract. So just watching someone behave empathically can increase your own capacity for empathy. And we certainly understand this in rearing children. Being able to treat our children with loving kindness and empathy teaches them how to be empathic, that they see us acting that way toward them, they know what that feels like, and then they can extend that to others. So we become their role models. And again, how important it is in youth to develop some of these, but throughout our lifespan. So you're never too old and it's never too late for a role model. To build a healthy body that sustains us over time, there's lots of research coming out now about the importance of physical health and physical activity, particularly in relation to prevention of dementias and cognitive decline, how critical it is to have a healthy body. It's very important to have a healthy body to also guard against anxiety, depression, the kind of mental health struggles and risks that we may face as this pandemic continues. So it's one thing to be able to maintain good mental health now, 3 months in, 6 months in, 9 months in, 12 months in and beyond. It will be a greater challenge. And although we'll certainly need good mental health and all the habits that I'm talking about, we will really need fit and healthy bodies. That it's such an integral part of our mental well-being as well. It reflects an action orientation towards life, so that we face life's adversities with this notion that we can figure things out. And a healthy body is part of that strength in figuring things out. Never stop learning. The importance in building resilience of challenging your brain and your heart. Learning here is not just a cognitive, intellectual endeavor. It is a highly emotional investment. To be cognitive and emotional learning go hand in hand. We learn best when we're deeply emotionally engaged and invested in what we're learning. The other aspect is learning how to regulate our own emotions. That's an aspect of learning. An example is mindfulness meditation. So I've been doing online support groups for health, frontline health workers, and we end each group with a brief 5 to 10 minutes meditation because it helps calm the mind and ease the body and can endure in lasting changes in the brain. In this part of the brain we call the medial prefrontal cortex. So think about between your eyes, your forehead, the area right there behind that strip in the middle of your forehead, that's the area of the general area of the medial prefrontal cortex, which helps us regulate emotion. Regulating emotion, being able to manage negative emotions, is also highly correlated with supporting immune functioning. So it supports what we call psychological immunity, psychologically healthy responses. And we can learn these aspects. Related to this is to develop this capacity to be flexible, mentally flexible and emotionally flexible, so that we face adversity, we face challenges. We don't just have one go-to response. So we don't have to just run away. We don't just have to get angry. We don't just have to shut down. We have a variety, a wide repertoire of responses. Again, think of the broaden and build model of resilience. You want a broad and deep range of resources and capacities within you to be able to draw upon in stressful times. In general, we talk about problem-focused coping being more helpful than emotion-focused coping, but over the long term, which is what we're looking at with this pandemic, you will need both, meaning you will need to put aside your emotional distress and focus on solving a problem, taking an action that's positive and helpful. At the same time, you'll need to acknowledge your emotions, be able to express them in appropriate ways, helpful ways, in order to maintain that kind of action orientation. So the ability to tolerate distress and take action even in the face of distress. And over again, understanding, as we all know, that we learn the most from the things that we failed at. And the last aspect, and this is where the soul part of the title of this workshop comes in, this webinar comes in, to hold reverence for meaning and purpose in life. So from Nietzsche, the profound, renowned philosopher, he who has a why can endure almost any how. So those who have a meaning, a deeper purpose in life, do better in life. And certainly as one gets older, and I am in this category, the meaning and purpose of our existence matters more and more. Those who are in some ways struggling the most now, and again in a certain sector of privilege, are those who are struggling to find meaning and purpose. I've been working with a couple of humanitarian foundations, helping them understand the difference between adapting to the trauma of a pandemic on an organizational perspective versus allowing it to have a transformational effect. And part of that transformational effect is rethinking the meaning and purpose of your organization, and for each of us individually to be rethinking the meaning and purpose of our life and our life's work. And another noted philosopher and writer in this was Viktor Frankl, who wrote the wonderful work Man's Search for Meaning, survivor of concentration camps, who understood what it meant, what it took to survive those kind of horrific experiences, and understood the centrality of meaning, particularly the meaning in suffering. Here I also just want to acknowledge and thank, before moving on, some of the sources of my own learning about resilience. And one of them has been my husband, who is a decorated Vietnam vet and has been through just an awful lot in life. And my husband, Frank, is just eternally optimistic, not in some denial of reality way, but just in the capacity to always maintain hope and optimism. I will share with you that by nature, I am not such an optimistic sort. I am more of a fatalist. And so I feel that I am living proof that one can learn to become optimistic and hopeful. And so I credit my beloved husband for helping me learn some of these things. It's never too late in life. And the other role models I have had in my life are the refugees I've worked with in this country and other parts of the world, and the immigrants, documented and undocumented, I've worked with here. Those two communities and groups have taught me what it means to show grace in the midst of suffering, and to be able to transcend suffering and keep moving forward in life for oneself and one's children. So I feel like I've learned a tremendous amount from refugees and immigrants in the work I've done, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. This is just a quick graphic that Dennis Charney created for a professional presentation, conference presentation, that summarizes what we talked about. I just want to draw our attention here to signature strengths. So just learn what you're good at. Learn what you're just naturally good at. And those are your signature strengths, and then see how those are transferred, mapped onto this resilience model that he has. Questions and comments now, and then we'll pause and see if we have time for a brief practice, a little bit of a meditation exercise, very brief if we have time. If we don't, we will forego that, but see if there are questions and comments now.
There is a question from Christine Garcia, Monica.
Yes.
And it is, how do past complex traumas impact the growth and development of resilience in organizations and individuals?
I'm sorry, Micah, I missed the first part. I just heard the complex trauma part. Can you just repeat the first part?
Sure.
I'm sorry, yes.
How do past complex traumas impact the growth and development of resilience in organizations and individuals?
How do you pass that along? I'm having a little difficulty understanding in terms of the difficulties that people with a complex trauma history have. How do you help organizations deal with that and build resilience?
Yeah, I think it's how people in the past, how they experienced past traumas.
I'm sorry, I kept thinking you were saying how we pass that along to yes.
Oh, no.
In the past, yes. Really appreciate that question. Thank you, Christina, and also something that I think that you probably have some awareness of too, you know, knowing some of the work that you've done. So I think to recognize that, so complex trauma is what people who have had many adverse experiences in childhoods where they've been maltreated, physical, mental, sexual, emotional abuse. And the long-term effects of that on human beings, including the risk for depression and anxiety and a host of other mental and physical health problems, but also the capacity to be able to rise above that kind of suffering and be able to use what one has experienced as suffering, find meaning and purpose in that, and be able to give back some of the hard fought lessons one has learned. So to be able to work with organizations to understand how to create systems where we not just with respect and carefulness understand the trauma people have been through, but to really always, always, always honor the resilience that they have shown in overcoming some of those each and every day and what we can learn from them. So I hope that's some kind of answer. Happy to clarify if there's additional.
Thank you, Monica. And we have another one from Brian Eicher. His question is, in a time where social distance is a standard expectation, is there a broader understanding of social connection now, such as social connections online through video games or other online forums?
Yes, and hello to you, Brian, as well. So thank you for that question. And you also have some expertise in this area. So some of the participants, if you don't mind, I'm calling you out because I know you have expertise, and I'm very grateful for that. And hope you continue to share that. So I have started using the term physical, and I have for a while since the pandemic started, using physical distancing. I'm part of a broader global group that works with COVID, and so the global preferred term is physical distancing rather than social distancing, for just the very thoughtful, astute reason that Brian brings up, that we don't actually want greater social distance. We want greater social connection. We have to stay physically distant from one another. So absolutely, Brian, as you wisely brought up, online groups, video games, chats, video chats, Zoom times with family. We have gotten very, very, very creative with that. And that matters a lot and is absolutely necessary. I'm just going to raise two quick points. One is, at the end of the day, this is a grand global social experiment. We don't know what the long-term effects will be on children, babies, older adults, everybody in between, on this kind of prolonged physical distancing, because we need skin-to-skin contact. I'm not even talking about touching, but the physical presence of another human being. We need that. We are wired for that as human creatures. Seeing somebody on your video screen is not the same. You may be about the same distance. It's not the same as being in their physical presence. So we don't know the long-term effects of this, but there's some concerns about that. And then lastly, it's a very much of a double-edged sword. We're so grateful for Zoom, and Zoom is also just killing us, if I can just sort of speak frankly, and I don't mean to criticize Zoom, but just to say that the prolonged time online, Zoom meetings, chats, it's difficult. There's studies being done why it's just much harder to communicate online than it is in person. Much, much harder. It takes more time and effort. It just takes a lot more for our brains to do that, and we don't understand the long-term effects of that as well. So yes, we absolutely need the online connection, and there may be some cost to that. And like I said, it's a grand social experiment.
Thanks, Monica. And we have one more from Todd Pisani. This question is, we are practicing and teaching trauma-informed in Camden. How does trauma-informed and even strength-based hold in with resilience in heavily traumatized communities?
Mike, I'm so sorry. I'm just having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. So I'm sorry to everyone to ask you to repeat the question again. But if
Sure,
you can repeat it again. Sure. And I think it's me. Go ahead.
Sure. The question reads, how does trauma-informed and even strengths-based hold in with resilience in heavily traumatized communities?
Yes. So I think it's part and parcel of the same thing. So but again, a caveat. So without getting lost in the weeds. So I think a focus on resilience and the strength and courage people show in the face of adversity is absolutely intertwined and is integral to a trauma-informed and strength-based perspective in communities. Absolutely. So I think that resilience is a component, and resilience building is a component of trauma-informed and strength-based approaches individually in programs and communities. I guess I just want to say one thing that is a political comment, and I recognize that, so I may get into some trouble here, but it's a psychologically informed political comment, and that's the limits of resilience. And a long time ago, I co-authored a chapter with a dear colleague of mine where I actually spoke quite a lot about the limits of resilience that stemmed from working in Rwanda for a period of time, which is a highly resilient culture. And thoughts about that resurged during some of the disasters in Puerto Rico, and then some of what we're facing now. So the human capacity for resilience, for being strong in the face of adversity, and the honor we need to give that human capacity should never, ever, ever be abused. So we should not deny vulnerable populations, vulnerable communities, vulnerable individuals the resources they need: physical, financial, medical, social, mental health resources, political resources they need to continue to build strong communities, to continue to address racial disparities, inequality, racism, stigma, and marginalization. We can't use resilience as an excuse for not giving people what is necessary and what is part of their birthright as human beings, if I can just say that. And I will say to you that I've been in uncomfortable situations where I've actually seen resilience subverted in some ways, as in communities will be fine. They have their religion, they have their faith, they have each other. We don't need to give them food. We don't need to give them basic health care. And so I just want to say that, because I always feel that until I've kind of made that the darker side of resilience point, I feel like it's a little incomplete, and it has, in some ways, too much of the Western focus on positivism. And I think that other parts of the world can teach us the limits of resilience as well as communities right here in the U.S.
We have another question from Rebecca Rosenblum.
Mm-hmm.
I coordinate a trauma recovery network in the Boston area that uses early EMDR interventions to aid communities in response to high stress events and disasters. What are the better or free measures that are used these days for assessing resilience and PTG?
I don't know that I'm an expert in that off the top of my head. So in terms of measures, there's a range of psychological measures, and I'm happy to give that offline as well. Certainly there's the gold standards of the PTSD checklist. PCL5 is one example for just measuring whether the symptoms and reactions of PTSD, one particular kind of trauma, go up or down. I'm not a fan of talking about PTSD, I'll be honest with you, and I'm sorry for the psychologists in the audience. I prefer to think of issues as trauma spectrum, trauma-related problems, because I feel that PTSD is a very narrow, very westernized concept, and so I like to broaden it more. And certainly about early interventions with EMDR, I have mixed feelings about that, but I think that whatever your institution, whatever your organization feels are good pre and post measures that, if I can just say, capture quality of life in addition to the trauma-related symptoms. I think that's important, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is really improve people's quality of life, not just reduce their symptoms. So kind of a broad answer. Happier to answer more specifically offline. My email's at the end of this. Anything else?
Yeah. Rosemary Azaro asks, she asked if you can offer some thoughts on grief during this time, those dying in hospitals or nursing homes without the presence or others, and the inability to have traditional funeral rites.
Oh boy, yeah, that is a topic unto itself. I feel like a heaviness settle in my chest as I hear that question, because it's a lot of, I'm doing quite a lot of COVID-19 work these days, and it's a lot of my work is talking with people who have lost someone, and the very poignant, painful point you raise, Rosemary, about not being able to be with someone. I can't imagine that. And so there's a lot of talk right now about trauma and PTSD in relation to COVID. I think we would be well advised to shift our focus to the broader cultural and spiritual understanding of how we will grieve in our cultures, in our families, in our communities. We will, I think, be facing a very large grief reaction over an extended period of time. And grief is exhausting, and it takes a lot of work. It also takes a real community to heal from it. And it is the very thing that we are, in many ways, that physical contact and the touch that we're deprived of. So I don't have an answer for that. I think me and everybody else is trying to figure that one out and offer as much as we can online, offer as much as we can in the spoken word, but knowing that there's real limitations. I will just say one thing that just sounds like a small point. Sometimes it's a lot better to talk to people on the phone than online. There's the voice that carries a lot. And when people are grieving, sometimes it's easier for them to speak on the phone than it is in a video chat. Not always. So I don't want to make these broad, grand pronouncements, but don't underestimate the power of the voice to communicate universal empathy, and that at the end of the day, that's what we'll need from one another.
And we have another one from Laura Locker. She says, I hear many of my young adult clients struggling with the sense that their normal developmental activities have been cut short. School, dating, social relationships, separating, or individuating from their families have all been cut short by the pandemic.
Yep, very true. And hello, Laura. I think you're in the DC area, and I'm hearing that. I think we're all hearing that, that it is life interrupted, and perhaps more critically for us as like those of us in the psychology world, it is development interrupted. And to recognize that it is a disruption in development that on a very large scale that we don't understand the consequences of. And so to be able to build in as much opportunity to engage young people, my own just very simplistic thoughts is that rather than trying to make up to them something that we cannot make up for them, engage our youth, particularly college educated, older teens and emerging adults, as we call them. Engage them in relief efforts, engage them in giving efforts, making masks, getting food, pizza deliveries for frontline workers, talking to people in nursing homes, sending cards to people in nursing homes. Engage them in a large scale effort, because the best antidote for what they may be facing is, in addition to the empathy, the universal empathy we'll give them as adults, is to be part of a giving effort in their communities.
And she did add a follow-up, and she asked, how do they help them cope with this?
So I think those are the two suggestions I have. One is to be just deeply empathic, and it's difficult when we're all quarantined together, and irritability sets in, and just we're running into each other and bumping into each other. So to always always lead with an empathic response of trying to understand as much as we can this experience for them. To support their connection to one another would be a second, which young people naturally do, which would be very much a second recommendation. And then the third recommendation is to really quickly move to getting them involved in an effort that helps others who are also suffering.
Question from Kim Nessel. Any specific resources or interventions you recommend for organizations with limited resources or funds looking to support their first responders over the coming months?
Yes. Hello, Kim. There's just so many developing. So just some general thoughts. Most larger hospital systems, New York metro area, New York, New Jersey, most larger hospital systems have within their medical systems, hospital systems, are already organizing psychosocial support, Doctors Without Borders, a group that I've worked with, is organizing psychosocial support. They very rarely have an effort in the U.S. They feel the U.S. needs it now. And then a couple of things just locally. The New Jersey Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services will be starting a FEMA grant, an emergency crisis counseling grant. That grant will include lots of services for frontline workers and first responders. And then just last thing is just I'm part of the American Psychological Association's very large multi-division COVID-19 task force that is led by Division 56, the Trauma Psychology Division. We have, I think at this point, I'm trying to keep track, 12 or 13 working groups. There's a hospital workers working group. So we're still new in our work together. So the working groups are working on a variety of different initiatives. And so we'll be disseminating those through different divisions of APA as well, just on a professional note. But hospitals are, and as well as houses of worship, are doing lots and lots. And then lastly, I can just say from the Mental Health Association here in New Jersey, the wonderful, wonderful organization, MHA&J, which has, local affiliates, but the state MHA&J is doing a whole lot. So they have groups all the time.
And for timing purposes, we have time for one more question. And also, Monica, could you actually address if these slides will be available for the attendees?
Yes. Available? Yeah, I'm happy to do that. However, you and Caitlin can suggest to me, but I'm happy to. Yeah.
Sure. Great. And one last question. This one from Clarissa Green Anisich. Sorry if I pronounced your last name wrong, Clarissa. The question is, any broad recommendations for keeping our systems accountable for creating conditions conducive to processes of resilience?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I'm thinking, and in my mind, if I can just say, you probably can't see me in my thinking position here. I'm thinking, reflecting on the word accountable, and I don't have easy answers. Like, these are very depth-oriented questions, and I don't have easy answers. All I can say is really support, and I'm so glad you're asking that question in that way, because as time goes on, it will be easy to cut corners, if I can say, morally and ethically. We're in the heroic phase. If you study disaster mental health, we're in the heroic phase a little bit still of this disaster, this pandemic, though if I can also observe personally, I think we're crashing out of that pretty quickly. And it will be a bit of a scramble to hold on to our true north, to speak again about the qualities of resilience and that moral compass. And I think that use your social connections, use your connections with one another, organize yourselves in your workplaces, in your communities. I'm thinking also, I have to say, just to step out of the workplace world, all that we're going through with witnessing the killing of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery recently, to organize ourselves in communities and in workplaces for fairness and equality. And so, it may feel completely off topic, but I think in the workplace, really pushing for fairness and equality and transparency. I know that those are organizational buzzwords. They're going to mean something different now. And that's what our focus needs to be.
Thank you, Monica. And again, thank you for your time, and thank you to everybody who joined us and engaged with us and asked your questions. I think we're going to conclude for now in terms of timing. I'm sorry for everybody who asked a question and we just couldn't get to it. Monica, can you share a little bit? Well, you just put your slide up. You can share people your contact information in case they want to send you a question or something.
Yep, I just put a slide up that the best way to contact me is Gmail. It's the central dumping ground of all my emails. So it's just the best way to contact me there directly.
Great. Thank you so much.
I really want to thank everybody. Thank you for your very thoughtful, astute questions. Micah and Caitlin, thank you so much for helping me through this. And be well and be truthful is my only, parting thoughts for the day. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Be safe, everybody.